Do you mind if I hold my hand over my head like this so that I can see you? Because that light is giving me a headache. Welcome back. So the next panel is really quite special, I think. It's going to be delving into experience of a very real and a very significant journey of prison reform. And it's going to be looked at from the perspective of an academic who studied the change, the practitioner manager who spearheaded the reform efforts, an overseer who assessed the scope and quality of those efforts, and an individual with lived experience. We'll talk about that later, though. The story is about the transformation of Hydebank Wood from a young offender institution into the first secure college in the UK. And so on the panel we have Michelle Butler, who's a professor of criminology at Queen's University, Belfast. She's a very experienced prison researcher. She's looked at prisons in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, in Uganda, in Colombia, and she's researched a whole range of things like prison misconduct and the outcomes of prison-based parenting programs, etc. We have Jacqui Durkin, and she's serving her second term as the Chief Inspector for Criminal Justice in Northern Ireland. And that's an independent oversight function reporting directly to the Northern Ireland Assembly, right, Jacqui? Jacqui comes to her work with over 30 years' experience in the Northern Ireland justice system in a number of court service leadership roles. And she also, before her first term as Chief Inspector, she was the senior civil servant in the Department of Education. Yeah? And then we have Richard Taylor, who joined the Northern Ireland Prison Service in 1988. And he progressed from prison officer to governor in charge, including for a time as the governor in charge of the Prison Service College. He's been governor in charge of Hydebank since 2021. And Richard has a Master of Science from the University of Ulster. He's been recognized with a number of awards, including a Senior Butler Trust Award. In 2024, Hydebank Wood underwent a full unannounced inspection, achieving top ranks in every category, and that's the first time that ever happened for any prison in Northern Ireland. And it's a remarkable achievement when you look at it in context to the fact that Hydebank had been described just years earlier as a failing prison. So the transformation didn't happen by accident, and so we're going to hear from our panel to better understand and appreciate how it did happen. And I believe the order of presentation is that Richard will talk first, and then Michelle, and then Jacqui. So Richard, it's over to you now.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, and welcome to our talk about the transformation journey of Hydebank Wood. Personally, I feel very honoured and privileged to be able to stand here today and talk with you and describe the journey and the success that my colleagues at Hydebank Wood and the wider prison service have achieved in the transformation of Hydebank Wood over many years. It's a very unique opportunity. We feel very proud of the success that staff at all levels have achieved. I'm going to run through a few slides with you. The slides may not correspond completely with what I'm saying, but that's just a distraction, to be honest. So how Hydebank Wood focused on developing, creating and sustaining change. And throughout my short presentation, I'll refer to a number of key themes that were introduced. Change in minds and change in lives is the strap line which we work on a daily basis and have done now for a number of years. You'll hear the term making a difference in all situations and striving and seeking to succeed. throughout this transformation programme, which has been in place from 2013, we concentrated, and I know there's a lot of people in the audience from prison backgrounds, custodial backgrounds, who have worked at the closest point of service delivery. And you especially will understand whenever I say that in that control and power environment, manipulation is fairly easy. But manipulation is a very short-term technique. We concentrated not on manipulation, but on inspiration in order to create change for people who reside at Hydebank Wood. And I heard it said that a successful leadership team are dealers in hope. And I think that the successful teams who had worked at Hydebank Wood over many years certainly were dealers in hope. Why did Hydebank Wood become a college? Dame Anne Ores was commissioned in 2010 to carry out a full review of the Northern Ireland Prison Service, and one of those recommendations was that Hydebank Wood should transition into a secure college. A secure college which would put learning and skills at the heart of all that it did. Now, this was a government initiative that had been on the books for many years, aspirational through a number of different governments, but had yet to be achieved. And we took on that challenge in 2013. Now, what was the challenge? I think it was described as fairly difficult because there was no blueprint. No work had been done on it before. And in many ways, we had a difficult journey to bring our staff on a journey that we were taking whenever we couldn't say what the end result was going to be. And in many instances, we were looking just months down the road. So what brought us to that journey? In 2013, there was a full unannounced inspection carried out at Hydebank Wood by the Criminal Justice Inspectorate, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons, Education and Training Executive, and the Regulation and Quality Quality Insurance Inspectorate. And that inspection was, in short term, fairly damning. The inspection report was the worst report that the Northern Ireland Prison Service had ever received over many years. And in short, fundamental change was required. The DOJ response was at that stage to analyse the report, and the then Minister, Justice Minister, Mr. Ford, made the decision that we had set up a task force for change. And that task force for change was to go in and put in place the fundamental principles and foundation blocks in order to create a successful custodial environment for young males and females. I should have said that Hydebank Wood is the only female prison in Northern Ireland and the only young offenders centre. But many of you will know in those instances I was asked to lead that change in terms of setting up that task force along with a number of key individuals. But a bolt-on management team doesn't work in those situations. I often liken it to the fact that you're going into an environment which is clearly hostile because the team is already there. I said it's almost like a large container ship going down the Panama Canal, and you're sitting in a canoe tied onto the back of this ship, half a mile behind, shouting up at the deck, "You're going the wrong way." Nobody listens. Nobody could see, and nobody cared. And nobody cared that nobody cared. So significant change happened for us because the existing governor then was replaced after a few months. And we got Governor Austin Tracy, who came in as governor in charge. I took over as deputy, and our director of prisons, who's here today, came to work as a third in charge with us. And that became a very cohesive team. And we were able to work our way through the report. I think it's fair to say that when I read the report the first time, having worked at Hydebank Wood probably 7 years before, I thought the report was fairly misguided. But when I got on the ground, all of the evidence that was discussed in the report was clear to be seen. There was a significant breakdown in relationships between trade union side and management, significant breakdown in relationships between management and staff. There was a significant breakdown in relationships between those people who were residing in our care at Hydebank Wood, both males and females. On a daily basis, our staff stood outside the gate until their starting time and then came in one at a time, therefore slowing down the regime immensely. When I say the regime, there was a very poor regime, and the report reflected that young men and women spent inordinate periods of time locked behind doors, in some instances up to 23 hours a day. There was evidence of cumulative punishment in terms of someone doing something wrong in a wing then been locked for a long duration of time. I'm sure many of you have heard of the broken windows theory, and I know, and be made very welcome tomorrow at Hydebank Wood, those people that are going. Hydebank Wood just resembled that broken windows theory. Very unkempt, a lot of litter, grass up to this size. There was clear evidence of women going back and forth to visits, education, healthcare, and being verbally abused by young men out of the windows. There was equal evidence of young men going back and forth to visits, healthcare, and education, and being verbally abused by women. And what that reflected on, that people were locked behind doors because there was no clear regime. There were 110 recommendations for improvement, and for those of you who work in the custodial environment, 110 recommendations is a fair bit in order to take on and to prioritise. So our job was to look at setting a new standard, and that standard was to create the secure college environment. So how do we create change? You see, people deny reality. They fight against real feelings caused by real circumstances, and they tend to build worlds built of shoulds, oughts, and might have beens. Real change can only begin with a full and frank appraisal and acceptance of what the findings are. When this is done, then realistic action can happen. And those were the steps that we took. What was the steps? Well, we looked at the management team, and we looked at the structure that was in place. Fair to say that people hadn't bought into the new programme. Now, there's many reasons why Hydebank Wood were in that position, and it's not for me to go through them all now, but there were a lot of good people in Hydebank Wood and a lot of good staff. Morale was a key factor, and morale was at an all-time low. And I think it was Mr. Ford said, not our Minister for Justice now, but the man that made cars, he said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're absolutely right. And our job was to get our staff and our colleagues to start thinking that they could do it. In other words, to transform the culture. Look for those quick wins, gain the confidence of both staff and prisoners. Mr. Ford, in his briefing to our management team in 2013, was very clear when he said, unless Hydebank Wood is turned around in 18 months or 2 years, you're looking at privatisation or closure. Now, I was asked to go in and lead it up. It doesn't really work like that in our prison service, you know. I think it's called a development opportunity. I had many reasons why I was too busy not to do it, but my communication skills weren't good enough, and I ended up at Hydebank, and I had, as I said, I'd worked there before. But it was very clear to us, very, very clear to us that could have been a very strong message and a strength in our corner. Nobody at Hydebank Wood wanted privatisation, and nobody certainly wanted closure, not less the unions. And the unions were a very strong, militant part of the structure within Hydebank Wood. So our job was to bring the unions on side. And the management maxim of no involvement, no commitment rings true. So we involved them. And one of the first steps we took, we created a role called the day manager, an Oscar 1 role, which was a management role, and we involved the union in that role. And effectively, one manager worked 7 days a week, 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night, and it was on a 3-week cyclical pattern. And we brought the union into those roles and got them involved in it, and effectively they policed our decision making. We set about changing the culture, because as many people here today will know that you can have the best vision in the world and the best strategy, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. And our job was to try and probably not turn a negative culture into a positive culture. As was once described to me, not everyone is going to pull on the rope along with you. The best that you can hope for in any given situation is those people that are pulling on the rope against you, set the rope down. We started to look at What was the offending rate? What was the prison population like? What was the appetite for change? And we said if we're going to be a college, now DMA ours was very clear that the Young Offenders College, a Young Offenders Centre should become the first secure college. But we were a joint site, both male and female. Impossible to have a male college and not a female. And we made the conscious decision that we would treat everybody equitably. And we made a college for all. And then we challenged our staff to look at what do we call people? We don't call them prisoners, we don't call them offenders, we will call them students. The truth is, don't call them students, we call them by their first names, and they call us by our first names. And we went through a number of different changes in terms of what our work was, and I refer back to changing people's minds and changing lives. And part of that was the introduction of work that had never been done before. We brought in therapy dogs. We brought in animal husbandry. We built what was known as the city farm. And we did all that simply because we could do it. And that was to change the mindset of people that our service is a very bureaucratic structure, as in any government department. But if you push the decision making down to the closest point of service delivery, people will rise up and take responsibility and take accountability and will deliver significant change. We started to transform the environment where people live and where people reside. We carried out a project in order to create employment for people, looking at what their particular skills were, putting learning and skills at the heart of all we did. We created an environment where people were confident to go forward for assessment for education, buying into what was important for them, and to deliver qualifications that some who had never seen before. Over 85% of people at that stage who came through our gate were illiterate in terms of numeracy, literacy, and ICT. I'm happy to say as that journey progressed, and as recent inspections have shown, those qualifications have now went as far as level 3. We partnered up with community organisations. We invited people in from outside. A lot of that was to overcome those obstacles which we have all faced in work. Budgetary commitments. Just 2 years into our transformation programme, austerity struck and our budget was cut by £1.2 million in a public sector organisation. Whenever money is cut, the first thing that you think about is what are we not going to do, or what are we going to do less? Instead of focusing on what the problem was, we focused along with the management team on what are the changes that we are going to make. We have committed to them, so how are we going to make those happen? We tried to think like a private sector organisation. We went for lottery funding, we went for assets recovery money, we went for European funding. We brought in just over £2 million of money that we didn't have. Then we looked for those organisations who had the funding and whose goal was to deliver some of the core principles that we wanted in terms of looking at neurodiversity, looking at people with mental health issues, looking at those who were coming in who were extremely vulnerable, extremely violent. And we harnessed the strength of our staff and both the males and females who reside at Hydebank Wood. I'm happy to say that the culture of a happy landing is an empty landing rings very true. On most days, our residential units are reduced to single figures with people in them. We started our sheep breeding programme. We brought in, as I said, the therapy dogs. And we engendered a spirit of change where people had the opportunity to take part in charity events. Nothing more greater than to get people who work together, to play together, and to raise money for a charity. Our level of incidents reduced drastically. We had a chosen charity every year. Last year we had the Air Ambulance. I think it was over £6,000 was raised. We had support from our permanent secretary down. I should have said at the very start, whenever I looked at what the top 3 ingredients for change were, for us it was the unequivocal support and leadership that we got from our prison service headquarters, from our directors, from our Director General, and from the permanent secretary. And they spent time, as they still do, on the ground, on the landings, talking to people who live and work there. What that means is, in an operational environment, as everyone knows, a very unpredictable environment. Something could happen within the next hour, which you would have to deal with. But if staff have the strength and the confidence to make decisions, and when a problem occurs, to sit and concentrate on the solution, and they feel involved, they will be committed to delivering that. What's our job to continue the journey? I think I have 5 minutes, have I, Frank? Am I about 5 minutes to go? 2. I'll talk a bit quicker then. As we continued our journey, then we overcame those staffing issues, and some of those key factors stood out. High levels of sickness reduced down to single figures and very low single figures. Staff at all levels came up with ideas of which they could suggest for change. Staff forums, management forums, people on the ground on a daily basis resulted in that atmosphere of change. I often liken it to a roller coaster, where it was very uphill for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden you were over the top. And where it stops, we don't know. Our job to continue the journey for us is to continue the work, to look at what those changes that need to happen in terms of the population, which changes every day. Changing minds and changing lives will still drive us forward on a daily basis. And I'll let you read what the inspection reports happened from 2013, 2016, 2020 and 2024. As I said, I'm exceptionally proud for everyone who were involved in that change over that period of time. But what has been very clear is, as a management team changed, the level of consistency not only maintained but improved. Very proud to stand today, very proud to be a part of the panel, and very happy to see you at Hydebank Wood. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Michelle and I'm from Queen's University Belfast, and I'm going to talk to you about a bit of research that we did at the early stages of the transformation, which was, as Richard talked to you about the transformation journey that they went on to get where they are now. What we were doing at that time was very much interested in looking at what were the different mechanisms that were being used in that secure college to try and promote desistance while someone was in a detention setting. And because the policy documents at that time was very much focused on using education and learning as a means of promoting desistance. So that is what we were looking at with this research undertaken with my colleague, Dr. Ciara Flanagan from the South East Technological University, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. So that research involved interviews with 49 interviews, 32 with people who were detained in Hydebank and 17 with staff who had key positions involved in delivering and designing the educational services, as well as 25 days of direct observations in Hydebank, watching and looking what was going on, taking part in it. So I only have a few minutes to talk to you about what we found, and I only have one lecture slide, so you'll all be cursing me. But what we really found was that there was 5 main mechanisms which were being used in Hydebank to try and help promote desistance amongst the people detained there. And I'm going to talk through each of the different ones, but you can see all of them on the slide there. So starting with the first one was there's a real emphasis on promoting the development of pro-social identities. And in particular, the way that this was approached was through transformative learning. So transformative learning involves giving people the knowledge and skills to transform how they think about the world around them and about themselves as well. So within Hydebank, the techniques or strategies that were used to try and promote the development of pro-social identity was through transformative learning, and in particular, building in activities in the various different educational and training programs, including in programs like art, where you would encourage people to be thinking about to engage in activities that were encouraging self-reflection and identity exploration. So for example, thinking about past selves, current selves, and future selves. So they're thinking about what has happened to them, where they are now, and where they want to go in the future. In addition to that, obviously sometimes people needed some help developing the skills to be able to engage in self-reflection or identity development. So services and supports were put in place to help people. So for example, to help them learn to, or help them be better at communicating or understanding and labeling their emotions, being able to more critically reflect on their own activities or what had happened around them, or learn alternative ways of responding to situations. Another core part of the activities that were undertaken in this particular area was providing opportunities for people when they were in Hydebank to take on roles that was enacting and facilitating and playing out these pro-social identities, and then providing opportunities for other people around them to provide positive feedback and reinforcement on that. So as Richard was saying, there was various opportunities and roles created throughout the campus in which people would take on roles working as baristas in the cafe, as painter decorators, bricklayers, gardeners, looking after the animals, hairdressers, various different activities like that, so that they were viewing themselves through those roles and enacting with members of the community who were coming in, and I'll talk about that in a minute, as well as staff and their peers, and getting positive reinforcements and being complimented in their work in those roles. And so in this way, it was helping to reinforce that development of pro-social identities. Another key mechanism that was being used in Hydebank was the building of efficacy and agency. And so efficacy and agency refers to our own beliefs in our ability to change and our ability to be able to have some control over the direction our lives is taking. And often people who are detained can be low on feelings of agency and efficacy. But agency and efficacy are really important on release, especially if you're encountering obstacles in society through stigmatization, discrimination, to help you try to keep going. And so there was a number of different strategies to try and build up and reinforce feelings of efficacy and agency. So the first one was, for example, staff talking to people and highlighting past successes. So trying to identify where the people had successfully achieved and learned skills in the past, or had successfully undertaken change, and kind of saying, look, you've done this before, you can do this again. So building that confidence. In addition, a number of the activities were kind of redesigned and were focused on being kind of task-based and being able to be completed in shorter timelines. So this really helped people when they were taking part in activities to build up their confidence that they could begin tasks and complete those tasks, and as they completed those tasks, they gained in confidence. So that was a really important part of building up that agency and efficacy. In addition, where possible, there was a real emphasis on people working in teams as well. And this was seen as being really important because obviously when they were in teams, if somebody was struggling, they could get help and support. And again, that would then help them to complete it and build up the confidence. But in addition, it was also helping them to develop their interpersonal skills and being able to engage in respectful interactions with each other, and also getting people used to accepting help from others, which then would help on release as well. As Richard was saying as well, there was also an emphasis on looking at the timeline for the awarding of qualifications. And what they did was there was changes made to those timelines and types of qualifications being offered to try and shorten the period that was required to be able to obtain qualifications, because a lot of the people who were in Hydebank at those times were maybe in on shorter durations, and so you had people who were maybe taking part in education and skills but then not having anything to show for it because they were being released before maybe they had to take part in the relevant assessment to gain the qualification. So there was an emphasis on introducing kind of smaller qualifications, but which could be added up and built on to make the larger ones, and which people could continue on and use in the community, or if they did return back to Hydebank or elsewhere in the prison system, they could continue on and to build that. And so that was a key part of them being able to, again, build up that sense of agency and efficacy and confidence in their own abilities. In addition, there was a real emphasis on, and you can see the next mechanism, supporting socialization. So as we all know, a key challenge can be the obstacles people face on release with regards to accommodation or employment, or just even having people around to just meet them at the gates or help and support them. And Hydebank recognised this and then sought to do a lot of work to help develop the socialisation skills of people if they had challenges in that area, but also then in trying to rebuild and repair and develop new social networks. So what happened was they offered a number of skills that were focused on developing the social skills, so communication, interpersonal skills, developing empathy and consideration for others, as well as obviously trying to help people and self-regulate their own behaviours to be better at that, to be able to maintain and develop their social networks. They then provided opportunities and help and support for people to actually rebuild or repair lost or damaged relationships with community, family members, or friends, recognizing that that was a key mechanism which would help people on release for assistance. They also sought to reduce the stigmatization that people would encounter in the community by opening up the doors of Hydebank and making connections with local organisations to bring the outside in and the in outside, to help reduce stigmatization and provide new support networks to people that they could access when they're on release, but also to kind of build a sense of belonging and acceptance for people in Hydebank before they even went out on release. In addition, they did a lot of work with employers, reaching out to employers to try and develop work placements, training, employment opportunities, or getting employers in even to share their knowledge and skills with people before they were released. Of course, it's very hard for anybody to engage in identity exploration or change or transformative learning if they don't feel safe or well. So there's a real emphasis on supporting well-being, and that involved ensuring that people felt safe, because if people don't feel safe, you don't have the capacity to think beyond anything else. They also sought to ensure then to maximise the time out of cell to try and avoid rumination or the potential for harmful behaviours. They increased access to mental health services and health services more generally, and peer support services. And they ensured good relationships between those detained and staff. And they also, as Richard already talked about, they used creative arts-based therapy, music, sports, animals, gardening, to provide a more holistic approach to providing well-being and supporting psychological well-being. And lastly then, when we think of education, we often think about enhancing skill sets and providing qualifications, developing skills so that people can obtain employment. So in Hydebank, as I already said, they took a broader approach to thinking about those skill sets, as I've already mentioned. But of course, there was an emphasis on qualifications and employability as well. So with regards to enhancing skill sets, there was a focus on developing individualized learning plans, looking at people's needs, their strengths, and their goals about where they wanted to end up. Then with regards to the activities that were provided in education, they're very much built around developing people's employability. So for example, helping them to write a CV, and through that then you were encouraging them to develop their literacy and reminding them of their strengths. In addition to that, then, there was a very much focus on addressing their needs, but addressing their needs in a way that people could see linked to their future goals of where they wanted to be. So, for example, if somebody wanted to work in a garage or own their own garage in the future, but needed help with numeracy or literacy, the provision of skills was built around helping them to get that literacy and numeracy that they needed to achieve the goal that they want. There was also a real emphasis on diversifying the training programs and educational programs that were offered to better reflect the needs and the goals and the ambitions of the people who were in Hydebank, and also to develop their entrepreneurial skills. And in this way, they sought to unlock the potential of those detained there. So I'll pass over now to my colleague Jacqui.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for bringing the summer to Belfast. So I'm going to talk briefly about the impact of independent scrutiny on raising standards and delivering better outcomes in places of detention, and particularly Hydebank Wood's journey. The independent inspection of prisons in Northern Ireland by Criminal Justice Inspection is important for a number of reasons, and these include: they're part of our Places of Detention Monitoring Programme and obligations as one of the UK National Preventive Mechanism members to support the state's obligations under the United Nations Optional Protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. That's a catchy little title for what we do in terms of making sure that human rights standards are upheld in places of detention. But they're also important as an important part of our statutory responsibilities as an inspectorate to have a human rights focus, to provide assurance, foster improvement and public confidence in Northern Ireland's criminal justice system, and to provide leaders with an assessment and priority and key concerns. The inspection team identified across prison, health, education and skills service an independent roadmap of what they need to pay attention to and an independent voice for the powerless. I just want to check with my glasses, see what, yeah. So, here we go. Of course, how prison leaders react to scrutiny, what they do about inspection findings and recommendations or concerns can vary. Scrutiny, including inspection, can be a powerful tool that helps prison leaders invent the future. Hydebank Wood isn't a quick turnaround story. I think their reform journey, as Richard talked about, is about leading leaders and about seeing people who aren't defined by their criminal convictions. It's about changing culture, the hardest thing in the world to do, and embedding and sustaining a focus on outcomes for prisoners rather than what happens from one inspection to the next. Richard mentioned the 2011 review of prisons in Northern Ireland, known as the ORS Review. It made for stark reading and gave clear messages about what needed to change. But I think it's important to realise when you set that in the context of Northern Ireland, shortly after the devolution of justice in Northern Ireland with threats against prison officers, the persisting backdrop of the Troubles, a history of a security focus in all our prisons in a small jurisdiction, including a separated regime for paramilitary and terrorist-related offenders, and much political and media interest in what happens in our prisons. Sometimes, it's really difficult when you have published a prison inspection that no matter how positive it is or the positive issues that you're trying to highlight, very often the media, unfortunately, will pick up on the more negative aspects. So the 2013 Hydebank Wood inspection report stated that a fundamental improvement was required in outcomes and made 156 recommendations. Young men were still spending too much time in their cells, and little was done in terms of equipping women with meaningful skills. Richard also mentioned about Hydebank Wood Secure College being created in May 2015, 10 years ago. There was a much bigger young male population at that time, and the women's prisons population has tripled since then. I think it's important to say as well that roughly about half the population are on remand. So you might not have people for very long, and trying to run a regime, we certainly appreciate as inspectors, is very difficult. The inspection reports in 2020 were memorable, not least because they were the first prison inspection reports I published as Chief Inspector, and 60 recommendations were made across the two prisons, and it was clear by then that Hydebank Wood was committed to improvement. CGI inspects prisons in partnership with His Majesty's Inspector of Prisons for England and Wales, the Regulation and Quality Improvement Authority, who provide healthcare expertise, and the Education and Training Inspectorate, who have expertise in education and skills. We've developed a whole inspection team approach to inspections where we respect our differing roles and professional expertise while still focused on expectations and outcomes that add value by having slightly different professional perspectives. Prison leaders see this in action and can influence their attitudes and responses to inspection findings and concerns raised. So by 2024, the inspection team identified 6 key concerns for each prison. And while recognising and celebrating success, Hydebank knows there's still work to be done on some important issues. It was also important to highlight good practice and progress achieved on the road to reform. Charlie Taylor, His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons for England and Wales, and I met some seriously impressive prison officers in Hydebank Wood. We know when staff speak to us authentically about the people in their care and what they're doing to support them in detention. They see their face every day. They are the hope givers. When you spoke randomly to prisoners, they could tell us, as inspectors, what they were doing that day and what they thought they'd be doing over the next week, what they were working towards. As you would expect, we heard some pretty candid feedback. What they were doing and what they're involved in, we as inspectors were seriously impressed by. But we know that driving and embedding transformational change needs great leaders with clear strategic direction and an intent to get there. And I think you might recognise some of the faces on this slide. Many leaders have been, and Richard paid tribute to the leaders that came before, but many leaders have been involved in the road to reform. And I believe the current Director General, Beverly Wall, together with Dave Kennedy and Richard and his team, are truly committed to changing minds, changing lives. And it's much more than a catchphrase. It is how and why they deliver services to help prevent reoffending and a return to detention. Of course, good partnerships have been key and need constant attention to thrive and develop. The Northern Ireland Prison Service, together with Belfast Metropolitan College and the South Eastern Health and Social Care Trust, together with chaplaincy, voluntary and community sector organisations, have been instrumental in Hydebank Wood's success. The Prison Service recognise they can't do it on their own and they need great partners. So it really is all about people. Attitudes to scrutiny can vary. What leaders and operational staff know about it and how they talk about it. Why it happens, the so what. How do prison leaders talk about scrutiny and inspection to their staff and partners? Do they know about expectations, healthy prisons tests, standards and outcomes, and how are they supported to deliver them? As inspectors, we foster professional relationships that protect our independence and won't shy away from delivering hard messages. Excuse me. But I hope this was Richard's experience, to assure prison leaders and governors that you want them to succeed, to sustain and raise standards. We have much in common. It's not about trying to trip you up. It's caring about the same things, about acknowledging and celebrating success, being future-focused with a shared ambition for growth and improvement. So having achieved reform, sustaining success needs just as much energy, focus and commitment. The complexities of the prison population, systemic criminal justice system delay and wider societal issues are things that are happening right across the world and certainly happening in the UK and in Northern Ireland. But it also means that the road to reform continues, and I'm looking forward to seeing where Hydebank's Wood journey takes them next.